Mike McCool here. I'm in the Royal Examiner Studios. With me this morning is Pam Webber. Pam is a local author. She'll be at the Royal Oak Bookshop this Saturday. That is what's the date on Saturday?
I think it's 14th.
14th, I believe, already. My goodness. So she'll be there at what time?
11 o'clock.
So she's there for a couple hours on Saturday morning, 11 o'clock. Tammy has all sorts of books and people coming in, and she's one of them. And it's quite an interesting book. We're going to talk a little bit about it here today. She's an author of 2 books. This is your first book here.
It's a debut.
Mark, this is her debut book. Excuse me. First book. First of many. All right.
Hopefully. Keep your fingers crossed.
This is called The Wiregrass. Is that right? The Wiregrass. And we'll talk about that as well.
Okay.
Your new book is called Moon Water. Moon Water. There you go. You got that, Mark? Mark, as he zooms in on your book to give you a little plug there. All right. I see that they're both set in 2 different areas of the country, but let's talk a little bit about Pam Webber and how she got into this business.
Well, I've taught for a very, very long time in at a university setting, and when you do that, they have that up or out philosophy. You have to
yes,
have
publish
to
or
write,
perish.
You have to publish. You have to research. You have to do all of that. So I have spent the last 30 plus years doing that, researching and writing research articles and scholarly articles, and then in 2000, let's see, it was 15, in about 2013, I had a cousin die that he was our version of Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer, and my sister, brother, and I had spent many summer vacations running in his little gang of hoodlums in the Deep South, and it just dawned on me that my children and my grandchildren would never know this man, and what an extraordinary human being. So I started writing the stories down, and as it went on, I thought, well, this would make a good novel. Even though it is historical fiction, there's about a nugget of truth.
Sure.
And then
in everything, there's always a little truth in everything. Yeah.
It's wrapped in a lot of fiction, but that's what started it. And then
I call that editorial license.
There you go. And I was putting the stories together, my mother died. My mother was from the Wiregrass. And I decided I needed to go forward with this and turn my writing energies towards writing historical fiction.
Right. Well, in real life, what do you do, Pam?
I'm a nurse practitioner, and I teach in the School of Nursing at Shenandoah University.
Well, so she is local in Winchester. We'll call that local.
Okay. Yeah, it's just a few miles down the road.
I talked to Pam the other day, and we were talking about her book, The Wiregrass, and she went on. I know we're going to talk about your new book the most, but let's just touch base about this one, because you mentioned this has some truth in it. Tell us a little bit about this area of the country called the Wiregrass.
It's actually a region that encompasses southeast Alabama, southwest Georgia, and part of the panhandle of Florida. And it's known for that sharp, hard wiregrass that grows there. It's rampant there, and it's not a type of grass you want to walk barefooted on for sure. But it's also, the region is very almost subtropical. There's a big aquifer that runs under a lot of it, which has given rise to clear streams and creeks and lakes in an area where, if you think about the South, you think of muddy running rivers and lakes, and this is an area that has a lot of clear running water simply because of that aquifer under it. It's extremely rural, extremely poor, and back in the late 1960s, even though there was a lot of social unrest going on, and this was the Deep South, it was, life kind of floated underneath all that social unrest. There was just day-to-day activities that had to be done.
Right.
They didn't have time for it. They didn't have time for it. It was a very simple life. They were doing their gardening. They were doing what they had to do to keep their lives going. And it was also a very simple time. My cousins, we had about 5 cousins that would converge there in the summers for summer vacation. And we would run wild. I mean, we really did have this little gang of, I call them hoodlums now because I'm old
Sure,
enough to
sure.
do it. But when I was doing
And you
those,
hope no one remembers.
yeah, when we were doing those things, it didn't seem all that bad. But it was extraordinary. We would leave after breakfast in the morning, and we would not come back until dinner or after, and no one worried. We were never afraid.
Right.
It was a wonderful time.
Everybody and neighbors, but boy, if you did something, them neighbors would
The
snitch
whole
on you.
town knew.
Yeah,
The whole
it didn't
town
take
knew.
long.
That's
So
exactly right.
It's an interesting story. I think people would be really impressed with it, and I'm sure when they come by on Saturday, they can talk to you. You'll give them a little information about that. Let's talk about your new book, Moonwater.
Okay.
It's a little different type of a story.
It is. I was raised in Central Virginia in a town called Amherst. I don't know. You know where Sweetbriar is.
Right.
Sweetbriar is adjacent to the town of Amherst. And in 1969, my father was a state trooper, and the Camille. I don't know if you all remember or not, but there was this massive Category 5 hurricane that came up over the Gulf Coast into Louisiana. It's called Hurricane Camille.
I slept through it.
Did you really?
I
Were
was
you
at
down
the-
there?
I was in Biloxi, Mississippi.
Oh my gosh, how lucky were you? A lot of people didn't, they got washed away. But
Oh, they did.
anyway, this was before weather radar. And the Camille came on shore, went up to the middle of the country and took a right turn and came over Central Virginia. And the meteorological gods aligned, and that sucker hit the Blue Ridge Mountains over Nelson County and dumped about almost 650 million tons of water
Wow.
in that one little county, and washed the Rockfish Valley away, basically. My dad at the time was a state trooper in Amherst County, and one of his friends was Ed Tinsley, who was the state trooper who was in Nelson County. So I had just started ninth grade at the time that this hit. And it was one of those events, it was just a sentinel event that you never forget. I don't care how old you get, you remember waking up. I remember the storm being bad, but we had bad storms all the
Sure.
time. I didn't think anything of it. But to wake up to that calamity and what my father was doing, and my mother figuring out where she was going to volunteer to help. And the bottom line is there was not many people left to help. But it was a sentinel event that stayed with me. So when I decided to do the second book, I pulled some of the characters forward out of the Wiregrass into this, because Nettie was from Nettie was the protagonist in this book, and she's the protagonist in that one. Bring her forward and use what was going on in Central Virginia at the time, that calamity hit, that nightmarish flooding hit.
So there's a little bit of truth in this book as
A
well.
little bit there's a nugget of truth and this much fiction. So, and the good news about this was in Amherst County, you knew, but not many people knew, that Virginia has a very unique Native American tribe in Amherst County.
Right.
On their ancestral home is Bear Mountain in Amherst County, and they're the Monacans. And in the process of getting ready to do this, it was going to be based in Amherst County, so I knew I wanted to bring the Monacans in. And I had the privilege of meeting Victoria Lastwalker Ferguson, who is the Monacan life interpreter at the Monacan Village in Natural Bridge. And I got to know her about 2.5, 3 years ago. Extraordinary human being, and epitomizes everything that we ever thought we knew about Native Americans. And in Moonwater, there is a Monacan medicine woman, and Vicky was my prototype,
There you go.
so to speak, for that Monacan medicine woman.
That's great. That's great. Well, we do use things in our lives to kind of like to tell our story,
Mm-hmm.
and it's great that you have that knack to do it. I'm just sitting here noticing this book here's a little thicker than that one there.
Well, actually, it's interesting that you said that, because when I wrote The Wiregrass, and so many people do this, they think, well, I'm just going to write a book.
Right.
I didn't know what I didn't know about writing, about creative writing and writing really good fiction.
Right.
And in the process of doing this and working with the publisher and the editors, I realized, Webber, you've got some, you got to figure this out. If you're going to keep writing, you got to get better at it. So I found this group in Richmond, James River Writers, and through that group, they were offering classes through with people who were teaching at VCU's Creative Arts program. So for 2 years, 2.5 years, I would go down there and take classes, and we got this and again, this little cohort of troublemakers together, so to speak.
That's what makes the world move.
Yeah, really. And there were 4 of us that were writing novels, and the guy we were working with at VCU said, "Okay, well, I'll facilitate you guys writing novels and help you with it." He's a guy named Dave Robbins. He's a New York Times best-selling author. But we spent a lot of time reading each other's work and ferreting out what was good and really learning the rules and of the craft, and it is a craft. So this one, I think my later one, I think is the story's just as good, but I think it's written better and it's written more concisely. I can say in 5 words instead of 7 words now to get the point across. And so it's been fun. It's been like having to go back to school without having to get the grade.
Well, a lifelong learner.
There you go.
I notice, as you well know, in the Royal Examiner, I'm not a editor, but I sure have learned a lot about editing.
Yes.
And just reading things and then trying to say something with less words.
Necessity is the mother of invention.
And without using too big of a word that no one knows what it means.
And that's it. A lot of times, you got to figure out who your reader is and what they like to read and be able to say it well in a way that they're going to understand.
Right. They don't want to have to use the dictionary to read your book.
That's exactly right.
Right. It's really, it's amazing. Well, Pam, it sounds like, let's talk about one more thing I always try to ask you. Is there another book inside of you?
There is. There is. I'm working on the 3rd one now. And
a glutton for punishment.
Well, actually, this is my hobby. And it's the hardest writing I've ever done. Even research is a piece of cake. You've got very precise rules that you follow when you do research. So writing it up is not hard. This is hard, but I'm hooked. So I'm writing a 3rd one, and this one is actually coming to the northern Shenandoah Valley.
Wow, you're getting away from the South.
I am. Well,
you're just bringing it with you.
This mid-Atlantic piece, I think, has something going for it. But I am just starting that one now, so I hope within a year or two. It took me 4 years to write this one, 3 years to write that one, so who knows?
Maybe only 2 years for the next one.
Keep my fingers
And you'd be
crossed.
like some of these artists that crank them out,
Oh, yeah.
have written 50, 60, 100 books.
Those are the ones you don't want to edit.
No, and they carry the characters, but there's a place for those kind of books.
Oh, it is. I met one lady. I was lucky enough that the Wiregrass garnered a good many awards, and we were at an award ceremony. And I literally sat by a lady who had just finished her 17th novel, and this was like over 6 years. I'm thinking, how in the world do you do that?
She's got a lot.
Yeah, but I'm sitting there thinking,
pinned up inside,
Well, either that or she's got a very creative mind.
Yeah.
But I like building the story. I like learning the characters and creating the characters. In fact, it's in the class, one of the guys said they become your friends. And when you finish the book, you miss them.
Or you start talking about them in the 3rd person.
Exactly. I'm so glad that Vicki Ferguson was there to help me, because at least I can go visit my medicine woman every now and then.
Well, let's talk about books kind of in general. Okay. Do you envision these being turned into movies?
Oh, wouldn't that be great?
This sounds like it would be a great movie.
I've had people tell me that. And you know what? If Ron Howard or Steven Spielberg...
That's right. Those are the kind of guys that need this book. Pay attention, Ron.
I would take the call. I think people, if you write it well, people can see it.
Right.
If you write setting well, they're immersed. And one of the goals in the writing class that I do, and our group is basically still together, is that the goal was to make sure that the reader was in the seat next to you.
Right.
That they weren't standing over here watching. They were in the seat. They could feel what you felt, see what you see, hear what you hear. And if you do that, then I think people do put a visual component to it, and they think, oh, this would make a good movie.
Well, your books will be available this Saturday at the Royal Bookshop. Are they available online?
They're available everywhere. Books A Million, Barnes & Noble. Both books are distributed by Ingram Global Publishing, so you should be able to get them. I've got a great publisher. I've got a great marketing group. So
This is a real book.
It is a real book. People ask me if I self-publish, and I said, even though I have published a lot, I wouldn't have the nerve, because I was smart enough to know that I didn't know all that I needed to know.
Well, if you can get a publisher, and because they're publishing 500,000 to 1,000,000 books, depending on how you read the numbers, but there's a lot every year. And publishers are very picky now.
They
Because
are getting picky.
They're doing it, and
so it's a lot of times it's really based on, especially with the big five publishers, it's commercial success.
Exactly.
One of the worst books ever written was, when you look at literary standards, was Shades of Grey, but it earned hundreds of millions of dollars. So
Exactly.
I think there's a little bit of a standard. Do you want to be known?
That's because they judge a book by the cover.
There you go. Literary standards or commercial standards. And I wrote these books for my kids and my grandkids, so
Right.
I don't ever want them to be embarrassed about picking them up and reading them.
Well, it sounds like it'd make a great movie, both of them.
Hey, if you know anybody,
I
I'm
know.
game.
Well, it might be we'll have to self-produce
There
the
you
movie.
go.
Well, Pam, it's great talking to you. Saturday at the Royal Oak Bookshop on South Royal Avenue in Front Royal, Virginia. She'll be there at 11 o'clock. So please stop by and see her, and as well all the other great things that happen at the Royal Oak Bookshop. See Tammy there and tell her we sent you. Thanks again, Pam.
Thank you. I appreciate it very
you.
much.